Simpson, you've added a discussion on redistricting, so I'll turn it to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, over the past several weeks, the Board of County Commissioners have received numerous contacts and phone calls and emails from parents expressing their concern over the impact of school redistricting on their families, their neighborhoods, their communities, and their quality of life. And I want each of you to know that I, for one, share your concerns and your impassioned pleas and the individual stories that have touched me greatly. A number of you were disappointed as well as surprised to learn that the decision to redraw school boundaries was outside of the purview of the Board of County Commissioners. Many also were of the belief that the need to redistrict was related to funding associated with the recent trial, when in fact the need to redistrict is more that of individual school capacity and demographics that surround them. Now, when an issue of this magnitude arises and people find their futures threatened or about to be changed, passions become intense, and facts are often stretched or diluted by emotions. In a recent letter to Chairman Akmus from Chairman Yurchak, Mr. Yurchak attempted to correct some of these inaccurate statements by explaining the Board of Education's accounting practices and funding restrictions. It was interesting to me that many of his arguments sounded eerily familiar to those same arguments that we as a board have made when it comes to our balance of funds, accounting practices, and funding restrictions. I'm not at all interested in questioning his analysis, and I take his explanation at his word. I'm only reminded, however, that if there was ever a time to apply Stephen Covey's habit for increasing effectiveness, seek first to understand, then to be understood, this situation might be an appropriate time. I've attempted throughout my tenure on this board to not point fingers or place blame. As a board member, the buck stops with me, and I swore to do all that was in my power and within my principles to improve the lives of our citizens. In discussions with other board members and with staff, we have looked for a means that might possibly eliminate the need for student reassignments in the short term, allow the bubble of student population to subside, evaluate the many out-of-the-box ideas and solutions that have surfaced out of this discussion, and stop the disruption of the lives of so many students, families, and neighborhoods throughout our county. In a report to the Board of Education on January 23rd, Superintendent Ellis and Dr. Webb indicated that the use of mobile classrooms would meet this need for additional capacity at the identified schools for the next 5 years. This would come at a cost of $2,899,000 plus an additional $236,635 annually for operation and maintenance. I had the privilege this past weekend, along with Commissioner Akmus and Commissioner Helms, of attending the dedication of the new town hall for the village of Wesley Chapel. Many of you may know that for the last 14 or so years, the citizens of Wesley Chapel have been hammering out an identity and a vision for their community, and until now, they have utilized the Methodist Church Fellowship Hall as their meeting place. They now have a beautiful building there on 84. And at the dedication, the invocation was led by their pastor, and he spoke of how he believed that due to the investment made by the past and present leaders in Wesley Chapel, that town had deepened its roots and expanded its service to its citizens through a dedication to wisdom, compassion, and love. Folks, we don't need to be fomenting more angst in this county. We don't need any more lawsuits. We don't need to disrupt the lives of these parents and their children. So in that same spirit of wisdom, compassion, and love, and out of this board's concern for this issue's impact on the lives of so many, I would like to offer the following motion. I understand from staff that through bond savings and our unassigned fund balance, we can fund these MCRs, and so my motion is that we offer to the Board of Education these funds for that purpose. And Manager Koto or Mr. Crook, if my motion needs to be more formal, I'll lean on you to help me with that.
I think at this point in time, the board would, if under your motion, just allocate the funds, and for staff, Jeff, correct me if I stumble anywhere, and staff to take the appropriate action to make that appropriation, and whether or not we may want to put this in writing as with an agreement with the Board of Education as it related to the appropriation of these funds and the use of these funds.
All right. We have a motion on the floor then. Any discussion? Commissioner Helms?
Commissioner Thomas, go first.
Commissioner Thomas, he's deferred to you. Go
All
ahead.
right, thank you very much. Commissioner Simpson, I certainly appreciate the forethought, and let me say I'm not naive. I know many of you are here tonight because of this issue. This issue has deeply divided our community from across our towns. It's divided neighborhoods. It's created a level of passion and frustration that I could think of other places that you might want to be tonight, but yet you chose to be here. And I have to tell you, as a commissioner, there's not a better feeling in the world to see this room full. But the problem is we fill this room oftentimes with a level of desperation or do what it takes to get what we need to impact our community. But in this sense, it's a little more sensitive. This is an issue that hits probably every one of your homes because you've got children. And you've got on this board here, many of us that are dads with young kids in elementary schools. I understand your concern. I'd be right where you're at. And Commissioner Simpson alluded to the frustration and some of the complexities of the letter that we received from Chairman Yurchek about the accounting practices and funding restrictions. The truth be known, many of you are like me, it doesn't matter as long as it meets the needs of my children. That's what matters. And let me share with you for just a moment, if I may digress. I have been very pointed in my comments in the past, and I want to share some of my frustrations tonight. I've been on this board now for closing in on 3.5 years. We've been through multiple budget requests. This year alone, I'm not saying the document doesn't exist within the schools, it just wasn't made available to us, the need for ADA compliance. Well, if you've got a handicapped kid, you realize that that's important. But I dare say that our doors shrunk overnight. We should have planned this need far in advance once we recognized it was a need. Security. We should consider our schools. We should evaluate our schools on their own merits, not in a reactionary mode of when something happens in a far-off land or a neighboring county. It's irrelevant. We should evaluate each one on a day-in and day-out basis to keep our children safe. Piedmont Football Stadium, I don't know how many of you have seen that. I've been there. It's where my kids will go to school. It was in my motion that we fund the replacement of that because, not from a selfish standpoint, but if you've seen what I'm talking about, it doesn't need a whole lot of description. But that stadium wasn't built last year or right before I took office. It was built a long time ago. Then we find out in this year's budget request, not one time, and many of you may have been affected by leaking roofs, not one time was it mentioned. Yet we funded a portion immediately, and we have funded a portion now. And then just recently we heard about the redistricting. Was this part of the budget process that we just overlooked? Or what is really behind it? I ask that to say this. You would know better if you attended every meeting perhaps, but my understanding is there's not a lot of opportunity for comments. And I've called for, and I'll not stop until I leave office, that the Board of Education put their meetings on television, on internet, and make them available to people. And I've made this room available so you can see. Now, whether this is a lack of understanding of the issues or we're leading by reaction instead of being proactive, I don't know, and it's not for me to determine. But I want you to understand tonight, you've heard us talk about the lack of funding. This does not change that. We're able to benefit right now because we were able to restructure some bonds this past year, which many of you probably, it went unnoticed. But now you're going to be able to benefit from if Chairman Simpson or Vice Chairman Simpson's motion passed. But let me make it real clear. I've said from the day one following the verdict, it has been portrayed as if we're sitting on tons of cash, and a lot of people said just release the funds. If it was just as easy as releasing the funds, they would have been released. You wouldn't be sitting here and life would be rosy. But the county operates on a budget similar to yourself. If we want more money to spend, we've got one of two options: increase revenue. Not a lot of people want to pay taxes. And the other aspect is cut services in which people are dependent upon. And tonight, if this motion goes through, it leaves this county with only $991,000 above our reserves. Our general fund, which is essentially your savings account, is not the county's discretionary funds. It's funds to be there for those unintended situations that come up either with the schools, the health department, DSS, transportation, whatever it may be, so that we do not have a disruption in services. So understand tonight, if this goes through, we are depleting those funds from reworking those bonds, as well as depleting our general fund down to $991,000 above our policy of 20%. Let me make that clear, because the spin doctors will show up and spend that. But I want to leave you with a quote, or not a quote, but a paraphrase from our own superintendent. She said if this were to go through in her January presentation, this would relieve the cap and the need to redistrict schools. So therefore tonight I will support Vice Chairman Simpson wholeheartedly that we do this.
Mr. Chairman, it's hard to follow.
I don't believe I tried, but if you want to take a stab at it, go for it.
I received communications from the chairman of the Board of Education, personal, that how irresponsible I was to point out that the audit showed an $18 million fund balance. And state law, and just so happened I got information in the mail from the State Commission Association that identifies how schools are funded. The state, when you don't use the money, you have to give it back. The county, you get to keep. So, and during the 7-8 weeks of the trial, as Chairman Simpson and Thomas mentioned, we were told repeatedly how fund balances were just savings account and they were available. So from that standpoint, I made the statement to some constituents that asked me, why aren't you giving them the money? The facts are, they had $18 million in their fund balance. How they allocate it, I have no idea. July 1st, we gave them an additional $3 million in capital and $83 million in operating expense. And then in the fall, October I think it was, we gave them another $5.3 million. So do they have some funds? Yes. How they spend it is for y'all to decide what's the best way for the schools to spend those funds. But Chairman Akmus got emails said, how dare you say that? And I wanted to stand up and say, I'm the one that sent it out. I'm not ashamed of it. It was just the facts of what funds were available to support our schools. I personally visited Sun Valley back in May, and what they describe as a disaster in the schools, absolutely correct. What I don't understand is why it wasn't fixed over the summer. The funds were there. But Vice Chairman Simpson, I wholeheartedly support your motion, and I think we can move on.
I will just add one comment. I'm not going to miss the opportunity to call on Chairman Yurchek to schedule a joint meeting between our two boards. Yes. his last response to me was it was premature. I failed to see how much further down the road we need to go before we hold that meeting. We have a motion on the floor. We've had discussion.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
I don't believe Mr. Simpson identified the dollar amount.
All
We
right,
would just
Mr.
like that for the
Simpson, do you
record. I
identify your dollar
apologize.
I made reference to it. I'm sorry. It was not in my motion, so
Okay.
I can fix that real
You'll
quick.
clarify that. We'll be appreciative.
You could just say up to $3 million. I think the amount was 2.998,
And change.
3 million.
3 million.
That's what I have, 3 million, so.
If you'll approve allocating up to $3 million, we'll be good.
Are we good?
Do we have that on the record now?
Okay.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? None? Not going to tell you I don't relish that moment just a little bit. Normally y'all are in throwing